Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is the 30th day of August in the year 2016. We have one more day in this month, and then on Thursday, we will enter the month of September. And that brings us to the last third, if you will, of the year 2016. We will have 4 months left in this year. Agnes and I were just chatting before we went on the air about how eager we were to see 2017 coming. 2016 has been a little bit rocky for a number of different reasons, but I think all of us are guilty. I think every year people say, "Oh, I can't wait for the new year. Things are going to be better next year," and all of that. And Maybe they aren't, but I think the optimism associated with that feeling is really important. I hope that your day is going well, and I hope that we can maybe contribute just a little bit to making it a little bit better for you. We'll do the very best we can. As you know, we start on Tuesdays 1/2 hour later than we do on our Monday and Wednesday broadcasts. So we'll be on for 90 minutes here rather than our regular 120-minute 2-hour program. And so hopefully, if everything breaks right, we won't need to stop at the top of the hour for a break. We can just kind of roll right on through and maximize the fact that we do have a shorter time together today, so we don't need to interrupt it with a break, hopefully. I do look forward to hearing from you. We do have a phone number, and I do encourage you to give us a call. And share your thoughts or your ideas with it, and I'll touch a little bit on what we talked about yesterday as a lead-in to today's program. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate that way, and I know that some people, for one reason or the other, are a little bit reluctant about going on the air, and I can understand that. Believe me, I can. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's all one word, lowercase, WAOBRIEN, O'Brien906@gmail.com. And I do encourage you to take a look at our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you know how easy it is. And if you are not, it is very, very easy to join. That's one thing we know about Facebook. They're always looking for new subscribers. If you go to facebook.com to the home page and you click on the search box at the top of the page and just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page. And there are a number of recent postings on there, most of them related to contemporary political issues and events. The election, obviously, the personality and the campaign of Donald Trump, and a number of other things that we have made reference to in recent programs here. The point I would like to make with all of these avenues of communication, be it the phone number, be it my email address, or be it commenting on Facebook. The purpose of this is to encourage and stimulate the interaction and the back and forth and the opportunity for all of us to learn a little bit from each of us. That's really the goal. That's the purpose. That's why we're here. I know it works. I think you probably do as well. So if you are at all inclined to communicate with us one way or the other, I do encourage you to follow through and do it. We would love to hear from you, and I think everybody who is a regular at this stand each day that we are on would appreciate it. I know that I would. And I thank you in advance for your comments. The bulk of our program today is going to be focused on the results of an email from one of our regular listeners, and many of you will know because Horst has called this program a number of times over the last couple of years, and he basically sent me the link to this article and thought that I might enjoy it and that it might contribute to a future program. Well, not only did I enjoy it, I was absolutely captivated by it. And my challenge, and I will admit I'm a little bit nervous about it, my challenge is to communicate with you what I think this particular piece has to offer all of us. I think it's insightful. I think it's perceptive. I think it's educational. I think it's important. And I hope that I can do it justice. I'm going to do my best. I encourage you to stay with us on this. Yesterday, for those of you who perhaps were not able to be with us yesterday, or perhaps if you were, you probably, and I understand that, could have forgotten what yesterday's program was about. Toward the end of our program, we focused on the research of Lawrence Kohlberg and his 6-stage approach to the idea of moral development. And we went through each of the stages rather briefly, but we did do it, and focus on how the same question, the same moral question, or moral dilemma, if you will, seems to expand and grow as you move from stage 1 to stage 2, on to 3, right up to Kohlberg's stage 6. And what we see is a level of sophistication and a level of depth that seems to encompass each particular stage in sequence. And so it is this is Kohlberg's strategy. His sense is that if you can measure the particular level of moral development that a person happens to be on, then you can pretty well document exactly what that person will understand and appreciate and be able to relate to, and what he or she won't. What interested me, what intrigued me in this particular research some years ago, was the opportunity it seemed to me to offer to structure education in such a way that education itself would contribute to the expansion and the growth, the progression of these stages. In other words, it became very clear to me right at the beginning that when you really look at Kohlberg's entire program, you can begin to appreciate the fact that what Kohlberg is talking about is an educational process oriented or driven by the idea that it is possible to take people on a moral journey, if you will, from the minimal stages at the beginning of the process up until the levels of moral development in which people begin to appreciate some of the less obvious but more significant aspects of making moral decisions and for governing moral behavior. It seemed to me to offer a blueprint or an opportunity for educators, which is why I got into it. Again, and I didn't take time to do this yesterday, but let me do it again. You'll recall that the entire idea or the entire program was built around the story of Heinz, whose wife had an incurable form of cancer. And there was one drug that would save her life. And the druggist was charging an exorbitant price for that particular drug. Heinz could only raise half the money he needed. It was $2,000. This tells you how far back this goes, because now it would be $200 or $2 million. But $2,000, Heinz was only able to raise $1,000. And so then he makes the decision to steal the drug in order to save his life. And so the moral question is, under those circumstances, is Heinz justified in stealing the drug? And it's not the answer to the question. Yes or no is not really the relevant point. The real issue of attention here is the explanation for that answer. In other words, I think that Heinz is entitled to because. And then what you follow because with is the key factor. That's what Kohlberg's after. Because your explanation or rationale for believing what you believe is the way to determine the level on which your moral development is operating. We can pretty well locate you on the stage scale from 1 to 6 in Kohlberg's scheme by the way you explain your answer. And the further up in stages you go, the more breadth and the more depth there is to your explanation. And Kohlberg's definition or explanation of each stage suggests that as the stages progress, so also does your appreciation of the complexities involved in making sophisticated moral decisions. And the fact that that is linked so directly to the educational process itself, it seems to me, makes the project or the program, Kohlberg's research, an important phenomenon for teachers to be aware of. Because we know that the whole idea behind education is to begin or to assist the process which enables students to become much more sophisticated in the way they think and the way they function. And that's really what Kohlberg is talking about. Let me suggest to you, however, that there are certain conclusions or certain givens to Kohlberg's research, which I think all of us need to be aware. I think we're all aware of them. I think it's important to articulate them. It's important to look very, very carefully at the assumptions which drive Kohlberg's program. The assumption is that moving from stage to stage and enabling your moral decision-making to become more sophisticated and more informed as you grow, one of the operative assumptions, of course, is that that's a good thing. I think one would be hard put to argue, no, that's not where we want to go. But the fact of the matter is, there is an alternative argument to that. Think back to the letter that we looked at, in the letter from Thomas Jefferson to Andrew Carr. I believe it was Andrew Carr. And it's the letter in which Jefferson talked about the Creator would have been a bungler if the Creator created man to be a social animal, to function in society in close communication with other human beings, with other men, and at the same time denied man the opportunity to make that interaction with others positive. This is Jefferson's explanation for what he thinks is common sense, that if the Creator made man a social animal, he logically would give man the moral sense that he would need in order to make that relationship with other men positive and a good thing. And you'll remember that in that same letter, Jefferson used the example of educational sophistication, cognitive growth, and how it could work in negative ways. He said, present the same situation to a plowman and a professor. And Jefferson's argument was, oftentimes you will get a response from the plowman which is more in tune with truth than you will from the professor, because the plowman is speaking directly from his gut. In other words, the plowman is giving you what he knows to be truth, what he knows to be good, or indeed warning you what he knows to be bad. Jefferson's point, of course, is that within every man there is this moral sense. There is this ability, this conscience, this ability to know, naturally know, right from wrong. And Jefferson implied that the problem here with the professor is that because of the sophisticated cognitive education and instruction that the professor has received, sometimes you're going to get a situation from this particular person that is overthought. That man's reasoning ability is going to enter the picture, and oftentimes for purposes of self-interest or rationalization, people can rationalize themselves into making a case for something that they know internally is not right or not true. In other words, you can convince yourself of the alternative if you become sophisticated enough. And Jefferson believed that was the major difference between the plowman and the professor. And so Jefferson's argument is that oftentimes you're going to get the best, most direct answer to truth from the person who is functioning from his gut, so to speak, not functioning from the rational abilities of logic and cognitive argument that he has been taught, that he has learned. I think we can see that in society all around us. I used to use, in classes that I taught, I would talk about the legal profession, about the number of people that commit themselves to becoming and opening a practice as an attorney. And the example or the illustration that I used to give was the idea that we seem to live in a society where we would think naively. In other words, if we looked at this situation and immediately reacted to it from our gut would tell us that man's principal objective is to behave morally and with principle. Man's goal is to behave in ways that target truth and honesty and justice and all the other good things that we know about. In other words, if you imagine a circle, and within that circle is truth, then we would think that man's goal would be to direct his behavior right at the center of that circle, at the spot in the very middle. Because that would be the way to make sure that what you were doing was consistent with goodness and truth and honesty and all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is, we know that many people, many professionals are trained to behave in ways and act in ways which aren't oriented towards hitting the center of that circle, but rather functioning on the very edges of that circle. In other words, making sure that you don't step over the line so that what you're doing becomes illegal or immoral, but at the same time, pushing your own self-interest as close to the edge as possible without going over it. And in reality, that's where the opportunities arise for attorneys, because attorneys are trained experts in advising people on how to behave within the confines of the circle, but at the same time to maximize their own self-interest in what they do and how they behave. So the fact of the matter is, we live in a society where many of our most prominent people spend their lives operating on the perimeters, on the edge of that particular circle, not in the center. Directing our lives to aim for the center, allowing the desire to do good and to be honest and just, would make it very easy for everybody to direct their lives and aim for the center of the circle. But the fact of the matter is, the center of the circle in our society is not where the self-interest lies. Self-interest seem to reward those who can function as close to the edge as possible. And that's why many of them have high-level attorneys on retainer. So the fact of the matter is, the plowman would say the goal is to aim for the center of the circle. But the professor would say the goal is to maximize the benefits for yourself, to maximize what's best for you, self-interest, by operating as close to the edge of that circle as possible, and at the same time making sure that you don't cross the line, because if you do, you'll be in trouble. We see that going on right now with all the questions related to Hillary Clinton's behavior as Secretary of State and the exorbitant amounts of money being raised by the Clinton Foundation, and how prominent leaders of other countries around the world, I think I read where there were 16 heads of different nations who made substantial financial contributions to the Clinton Foundation, and then turned around later and requested an appointment with the Secretary of State, a conversation or a conference, a private meeting with Secretary of State Clinton. And so the obvious issue that Republicans are focusing on right now is the extent to which that constitutes pay-for-play behavior. That if you want advantages and opportunities through political contacts, political connections, the way to get them, the way to get the ear of the Secretary of State, is to make a substantial contribution to the Clinton Foundation. That's the negative side of the argument. The positive side is that the Clinton Foundation is an organization created by Bill Clinton in 2001 when he left the White House to raise money in order to distribute the benefits to the world's poor. And there's no question that much of the assistance that the poor of this world have seen in the last 15 years has been because of the success of the money raised in by the Clinton Foundation. In other words, what the foundation is doing with the money is worthy. It's noble. But the question is the process being used to raise that money ethical? That's the dilemma that we find ourselves in today during the campaign. And obviously, defenders of Hillary Clinton support the positive good and speak to the positive good that the Clinton Foundation is creating in the world. The opponents of former Secretary Clinton, supporters of Donald Trump, are focusing on the shakedown aspects of the process. the only way to get an audience with the Secretary of State is to make a substantial contribution to the Clinton Foundation, which means only the wealthiest people in the world have a chance to gain meaningful access to the ear of this particular Secretary of State. So depending on which side of that equation you come down on, that's going to make or inform the moral decision that you make. What Kohlberg would say, if he were here, is that how you defend which side of that issue you stand on is the factor that determines the level of analysis on which you are functioning. Again, to go back to the initial point of this discussion, Kohlberg's entire program is based on the assumption that this sophisticated moral analysis, this cognitive process of logic and reasoning, is good. But I think Jefferson told us in this letter we were speaking about that good is good most of the time, but not all the time. That there's another way to look at this. And maybe a world in which simple things applied, a world in which people were taught what they're supposed to do and then spent their time trying to do it well, would be the ideal. Not a world in which people spend their time functioning and directing their lives on the edges of the thin line between what's right and what's wrong in this world. Maybe that's really a way to explain progress. When we talk about expansion, when we talk about the development of a global world, a more inclusive world, a more pluralistic world, a world defined by regional trade agreements, by free trade, by common currencies, by open borders and all the other things that stimulate trade and stimulate business, we naturally assume that all of this is good, that all of this defines a world where we want to go, a world that we want to get to. But the fact of the matter is, what we're seeing in today's world is an example, our examples, not an example, many examples, of people who don't want to go there. Of people who are throwing up their hands and say, I don't want this. Hell no, I'm not going. I am much more comfortable. I'm much more secure and much more content in my own little world, in my own little corner of my own little state, in my own little district, in my own little neighborhood, where I know everybody, I know what's up, I know what's going on, I know what people expect of me, I know what I expect of other people. There are darn few surprises, and I feel, as a result of that I'm in control, that I have some control over my life and over what happens to me. But if I enter your world, this world of international treaties and pluralism and the mix of languages and culture and religions and all the rest of it, it's too damn complicated for me. It raises more problems for me than it solves. Why the hell should I? Well, it used to be that the answer to that question is the reason you should is because that's where our definition, the world's definition of the good life, is to be found. That's where the jobs are to be found. That's where the opportunities for quality standards of living are found. That's for higher levels of education and cultural sophistication are found. It's the people who can manipulate and function in that world that are sitting at the top of everything. Culture, education, income, sophistication, reputation, influence, they got it all. That's where success lives. So therefore, everybody ought to want to go there, right? So therefore, what about the people who don't? How do we explain the people who don't want to go there? How do we do that? Well, you could approach them and engage them in discussion and debate. But chances are they're not going to be able to debate with you because they're not going to understand the kind of arguments you're making. Don't forget, they haven't had the levels of education and sophistication. These are simple people who have been their whole lives has been focused on hitting the center of that circle. For them, life is simple. There are few complexities. Everything makes sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense to them is you. Because you're not playing the same game they're playing. While they're aiming for the center of the circle and trying to figure out why you're not, you're aiming for the edge of the circle and you're willing to come armed with a battery of attorneys to move in and protect you or help you if you step over that thin line. Oh yeah, you're making money. You're sending your kids to the best school. You've got the best jobs. You've got the huge retirement income. You live in good neighborhoods. You have a comfortable vacation home. You travel around the world. You have concert tickets to the symphony. You go to New York City, to Broadway, to all the plays. It never bothers you one iota that it costs so much to see Hamilton on Broadway. You're more than willing to do it because you don't even miss the money. It's just, for you, it's just money. So the answer to the dilemma always was, when one of these simple folk raised the question, why should I do that? Why should I want that? The answer was, because this is the ticket to everything that makes life important. This is the avenue, this is the road to success in this world. And nobody who really understood what was going on would reject or turn down an opportunity to walk that road. So I have to believe that if you don't want to go there and you don't accept the assumptions that everything I offer you is good, then that tells me the kind of person you are. And I don't want any part of that. And I don't want my kids going to school with you. I sure as hell don't want my children dating your children. And so ultimately, What we've got here is cultural tension, a clash. And we have made a monumental decision which seems to explain the basis of that tension. The reason that everybody doesn't agree with us, about progress and opportunity and success and adventure and culture and all the things that we've got going for us, is because of the kind of people these people are, these people must be. Never does it dawn on us that they can't understand where we're coming from. In Kohlberg's world, they're still at stages 1 and 2. The reason I'm doing this is because it's right, and if I do it, and if I don't do it and get caught, I'm going to get punished. End of story. That's the driving rule. That's the law that governs their lives. No complexity. Everything is simple. It's all black and white. You don't need drugs. You don't need alcohol. You don't need a personal psychologist, a psychiatrist to meet with on Friday evenings in order to get through the next week. Life is very simple. You've minimized the surprises, and you're in control. It never dawns on me that maybe the reason you're rejecting everything I stand for is because A, they don't understand what I stand for, and B, they don't want to know. What I'm suggesting here is that we may be in the midst of a worldwide cultural divide or division. It's been there, it's always been there. But only now is it becoming appreciated. I mentioned that our friend in Taiwan, Horst, had sent me the link to an ebook, 37 pages long. And the title of that book is The Great Divide. The author, Rob Smith. The date of publication, July 2016, last month. So it's pretty contemporary. The full title of the book, The Great Divide, Globalization, Populism, and Stumbling toward a post-scarcity world. Let me repeat that title because the title says an awful lot. The Great Divide, Globalization, Populism, and Stumbling towards a Post-Scarcity World. Let's look at the title first. I think we already know kind of what the Great Divide is that Smith talks about, because that's really what I've been doing for the last 20 minutes or half hour, is explaining the basis of the gap or the divide. It separates these two worldviews, if you want to explain it that way. And I think the use of the term globalization is, to most of us, pretty clear. We know about globalization. We know about the global economy. We've talked about nothing else for 3 years, off and on, it seems to me. We know that technology, the internet, and all the rest of these things is bringing the world closer together. It's breaking down barriers that used to divide regions and countries one from another. And it's bringing the whole world closer together and into more communication, more direct communication with each other. And so the world at large is confronted with questions of pluralism, of multiculturalism, of competing complex religions, of different cultures. And yet one of the things we've seen in recent months and years is the emergence of an alternative culture. That's the side, if you take the title, The Great Divide, and you imagine a line or a point in the middle, a midpoint, a center, a dividing line. Most of our study, most of our education, most of our learning, most of our research, for as long as back as we can think about, has been focused on bringing people to one side of that line. The way we've been raised or educated is to look at the world from that perspective. And the conclusion that we reached many years ago, generations ago, is that on one side of that line is civilization. On the other side is the absence of civilization. On one side is progress. On the other side is stagnation. And so over the years, our entire foreign policy's priorities in the world at large has been focused on a process of moving more and more people from one side of that line to the other side. And the internet, as much as anything else, stimulated the process that makes it possible to do that. It never dawned on us that there could be something wrong with wanting that or doing it or bringing it about. But the fact of the matter is, if we look back in history, we see all sorts of examples of peoples and cultures throughout history that didn't want to go across that line. And if we did get them across that line, they were kicking and screaming while they went. Many people, many cultures didn't want modernization, didn't want to move into this new global world that we're talking about. We're much more comfortable where they were. But as we know, the story of international affairs and foreign policy in recent decades has been the story of bringing people across that line. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're going to have a global economy, that means that the entire globe needs to participate. You can't have large sections of the world that make the decision to not go along with progress. Somehow you have to sell the idea that progress is a positive. And if you run across people that are opposed to progress, it says something about the kind of people they are. And the only conclusion is you're doing them a favor if you lead them to the good life, even if they think they don't want to go. Basically, you are in the process of civilizing the uncivilized. You can become much more specific than that. You can say you're Christianizing heathens. You're bringing the Word of God to those that don't have it. You're bringing the good life and all the good things that life promises to people that would never get there without you. If they fight you, it's because they don't know any better. But for their own good, they need to go. They need to be pushed or dragged or put in shackles and chains. Whatever it is, it needs to happen. Now, as we move into the 21st century, we're beginning to see that there's much more to that tension, to that cultural divide, as it were, than we ever allowed ourselves to think. Because the fact of the matter is, if we look back on all of this, we can begin to appreciate the fact, and it's an uncomfortable fact, that when we really think about it, when we're really honest with each other, we know that while we're convinced that what we were doing for these people was for their own good, we also know that in doing it for them or to them, whichever the case may be, we're benefiting ourselves as well. In today's business world, this was a win-win. They win because they became civilized and came into possession of all the trinkets, all the things that are associated with progress and civilization. But we gained too. We gained people who wanted to go in the same direction and support the same kind of things that we did. We ended up creating people who wanted what we wanted. How much more convenient a world is in which everybody's on the same page and everybody wants to go in the same direction. But if you're convinced that everybody ultimately is going to be better off for it, then that justifies doing some pretty horrendous things. And all you got to do is look back over our foreign policy and see some of the things we talked about, religious wars and the 30 Years' War and all of these things. I can remember a situation in 1914, before World War I, when President Wilson gave the go-ahead for American troops to move into Mexico City. And the only people defending Mexico City, the only defense it has, were military school students, teenagers. And when the media raised questions with President Wilson about the ethics, the morality of this thing, how do you justify the United States Marines going in and making war against children who's doing nothing but trying to defend their own city, their own nation? And Wilson's argument or response was, sometimes progress hurts. Sometimes progress is painful. Unfortunately, bringing progress to people, some people are going to lose their lives. But Wilson said, for those who are left, they will ultimately thank us, because what we're doing is in their best interests. Of course, the reality is that it never dawned on us that people ought to have the right, I know that's grammatically not correct, to decide what's best for themselves. And that maybe it's overbearing on our part to think that we have the right to tell other people how to live their lives and how to worship their God and all the other things that are associated with it. But here's the kicker. And man, it's a kicker. What has changed between then and now that makes this issue so important in today's world? What has changed is that the benefits of crossing that line, of going from one side of the great divide to the other, the benefits that used to be the lure, or that used to be the attraction, the payoff, as it were, is no longer there. Because the fact of the matter is, for many, many years, most of the revenue, most of the wealth, most of the power in the world has been flowing to fewer and fewer people. And less of it is being divided amongst the rest. It sounds like we're moving right into Bernie Sanders' campaign here a little bit. I apologize, but I think the point will be well made. We have reached a point in today's world where a very small percentage of the world's population controls most of its wealth. 1% of the people on the face of this earth own half of the wealth on this planet. The other 99% are left to divvy up the other half. What has changed is that all the positives associated with crossing that line have disappeared. Not only by crossing that line do you give up your security, does your simple world become more complex and more confusing? Does life become more difficult? Do many of the things you always took for granted are now in flux as you come into contact with more and more people that don't believe the same things you do, don't want the same things you do, don't even respect the same things you do? And what's your reward? There isn't any. All there is stress, confusion, frustration, anger, bitterness, hatred, bigotry. I give you Donald Trump. I give you that group within Great Britain that voted to leave the European Union, that supported Brexit. I give you the interviews with isolated people in the countryside in England who have told the media when asked, "This isn't my England. I don't even know this country anymore. Who the hell are all these foreigners? All these people of color? All these people that worship a God I don't even understand. I don't want any part of it. I want to go back to the simple life. I want to go back to where we used to be, when things made sense to me. I want to keep out all these foreigners. I want to build a wall. I want law and order. I want stability. I want my God back. I want my kids to learn about my God in my schools. I don't want them to know about somebody else's God. I don't want them to know about people who love other people of the same sex and get married in what they call same-sex marriage. I want to go back to a world in which people know which damn bathroom to go to. I don't want any of it. Hell no, I won't go. And here we are, in the midst of that world. And we've got an election coming up that is based on the kind of tensions that seem to divide that world. Wow. When I read The Great Divide by Rob Smith, published in July last month, it seemed to bring together for me a sense of comfort. And what I mean is, it began to feel like I finally could get a handle, could get my arms around what's going on. And what isn't. I really believe that this is an important, very, very important phenomenon. Because when you think back, it begins to provide, or it gives us, it gives me at least, a perspective that permits me to make a little bit more sense about a world that maybe I didn't understand what was going on before. But I do now. Let me share with you one of the things. It's a small point in the book. I'm sure that if Rob Smith were here right now, he would say nobody else even noticed that. No, this is a question that nobody asked me about ever before. I can't believe you're focusing on just this one little point. But I do believe it's a major one. Most of us have looked at the world in the past, and we have explained the problems and the tensions in that world from the perspective of politics. these tensions, these divides, if you will, seem to separate or to reflect political differences between peoples and cultures and nations and all the rest of it. What Smith says is that maybe we've been wrong. Maybe by defining these as political differences, by defining this tension as political tension, maybe we oversimplified the issue. Maybe the differences that we're seeing are psychological differences, not political differences. Maybe what we're looking at is the mentality, the worldview of people, and the differences between those worldviews. Maybe we're talking about psychology. Maybe we've been unfair. Maybe we've not been on the up and up. When we divide the world and say on this side are civilized people and all the people on the other side are uncivilized. We began to realize a long time ago, 2 centuries ago, that that was a little bit overbearing and a little bit unfair. So we stopped talking about civilized and uncivilized. We started to use for terms like semi-civilized or backward or underdeveloped. That's a word. Everybody can live with that. That's like changing the term for used cars to pre-owned vehicles. There's something about buying a pre-owned vehicle that's better than buying a used car. Think about that. It's choice of words. It's a game. And it's all aimed at creating a psychological difference in people. It's spin. It's sales. It works. So we began to call, during the Cold War, we began to call these less civilized parts of the world underdeveloped nations. And during the Cold War, we even said, well, we got 3 different worlds going on. We got the first world, which is us. And then we've got the second world, which is the communists, the communist world. And then we've got the third world, which hasn't made the choice yet as to whether they're going with the first world or the second world. Whether they're going with us or they're going with the communists. But we knew that if you dig deeply enough, if you go down far enough, ultimately only one of these worlds could prevail. And we saw that happen in the late 80s with the fall of the Soviet Union. We give all the credit in the world for it to Ronald Reagan. But the fact of the matter is, Gorbachev probably deserves more of the credit than Reagan does. But that's a political debate. We don't have to get into that right now. But the fact of the matter is, the way we defined our world, the free trade, open seas, commercial-free way that we envisioned our world, meant that you couldn't have a first world and a second world. If this globalism was going to truly be global, then everybody had to play it. Everybody had to be involved. Nobody could be excluded. Nobody could opt out. So we began to come up with a bunch of labels and a bunch of words that we used to describe these people who seemed unable to make a choice or who wanted to remain neutral. Oh, what a horrible word that is. Neutral. How the hell can you be neutral in a contest between good and bad, black and white? The world of good and the world of evil. A world which commits to God and a world which rejects God. How the hell can you be neutral in that kind of a choice? So what we began to do is conclude that the people who refused to make that choice and wanted to remain neutral, the word that the foreign policy people used was unaligned. Nations that were unaligned with the West or with the communist world in the East. We began to conclude this is when decision-making goes from Jefferson's plowman to the professor. We began to conclude that these leaders in these so-called unaligned nations were really in this for their own self-interest and their own benefit. And in the process, they were denying their own people access to the good life. They were denying their own people progress, jobs, an improved standard of living, education, health care, hospitals, schools, medical facilities. Basically, then, what we decided to do was to begin using our wealth in order to make these people see why they needed to come with us. And if necessary, why they had to do that, even if they had to overthrow their own governments to do it. We began to support coups. We began to funnel aid to countries whose governments were willing to line up with us. We began to fund radical revolutionary movements in nations where the governors or the leaders didn't want to come with us. We began to funnel money to the support of groups committed to overthrow their own governments and fall into line with us. We overthrew the Shah in Iran. We challenged the Sandinistas in Latin America. We became involved in things like Iran-Contra. We overthrew Allende in Chile. We tried early in President Kennedy's campaign tenure in office in 1960 to overthrow Castro in Cuba, and the Bay of Pigs fell flat. So much of the world we've known in our history books makes sense when you look at it from the perspective of what Rob Smith calls the Great Divide. But again, there was one major difference between then and now. And that difference was that when people crossed that great divide, there were rewards on the other side. In today's world, those rewards are gone. They aren't there anymore. Where are they? They're in tax-sheltered accounts in the Caribbean. They're in bogus companies that exist only on account books on Wall Street, if you watched 60 Minutes the other night. They're in part explained by complicit attorneys who demonstrated on 60 Minutes this past Sunday night that they were willing to doctor the books and to create bogus companies in order to hide money. People who wanted to bring money into the United States and hide it and have it not associated with them. And lo and behold, many of the people who learned to play that game best are now offering their services to lead us into a frightening future. Demagogues? Well, those people that are concerned about them can label them demagogues. Those people that have been waiting for somebody to come along and create a little order in a world that seems for most people to have gone out of control. Those people don't call them demagogues. They call them saviors. Oh, they may be vulgar, they may swear, they may insult certain people or whatever. But on the other hand, they're just saying what we'd say if we dared to say it. And if anybody would listen. The difference between us and them is that they've got the money and the position and the clout and the influence. When they say it, people listen. I've been waiting for a long time for somebody to say the things that they're saying. I've been waiting for a long time for somebody to come along and acknowledge and admit and make the case that our economic system is rigged, that the whole game of investment on the stock market is rigged, that elections are rigged, that international trade agreements are rigged, that these people don't care about jobs or about me or about my future. They only care about theirs. And they're selling what's best for them by trying to convince me that it's best for me. I may have bought that one time, but I'm not buying it anymore. And suddenly the world that they didn't understand became a world that to many of them makes perfect sense. I think that this particular scenario, this particular perspective, does an awful lot to bring order to what didn't seem ordered at all. I believe that. I hope that in part I've been able to make some of that case to you. The issue, of course, the place we have to go from here is what now? What do we do now? This is the way that Rob Smith describes what he calls the title of his book, The Great Divide. He says that what he sees in the world is what he calls a great divide that marks the transition into the values, viewpoint, and identity of a global world-centric mental operating system, a psychological system, a way of looking at the world that really does have political ramifications, but maybe the psychological ones are even more important. Smith says, anyone who's operating to the right of the Great Divide, most of the time, someone whose values, viewpoint, and identity are situated in one of the later stages, is able to take a critically objective view of their own viewpoint. Globalist is not, Smith says, an arbitrary term. It describes something called world centrism, transforms and extends one's tribe-exclusive values to people who are unlike myself in a more universal way. This capacity to become comfortable in this new global world is the modern foundation of liberalism, of equal rights. Suzanne Cook Gruter, who is a developmental psychologist, describes the world on the right side, on the good side of the Great Divide as follows. This is a quote from Cook Gruter. Our educational systems are geared towards producing adults with the mental capacity and emotional self-reliance of the conscientious stage. That is, rationally competent and independent adults. Democracy as a form of government is based on the idea of a citizenry that has the capacity to think independently and to make reasoned, informed choices. They have gained a measure of independence and self-authorship that makes them feel they're the masters of their ships. As captains of their own self-enterprise, they are no longer as vulnerable to being accepted or excluded as earlier stage adults are. They can now notice contradictions and inconsistencies within themselves and in the belief systems that they adhere to. They see that the way a problem is framed is the problem. Conscientious adults are committed to work toward the betterment of humanity according to what they consider the ideal future. Feedback can now be listened to without necessarily agreeing with it or feeling one's whole identity has been diminished. Whether the critic is right, misinformed, or misjudged me, the response is useful information about myself and about my critic. In general, conscientious adults are concerned with reasons, causes, goals, consequences, and the more effective use of time. They believe that the truth about themselves can be found and are motivated to figure things out and to inquire. Globalists are those who see the world and think in a way which Kohlberg describes in his advanced stages of moral development. What am I saying? I am saying that what Kohlberg defines as moral development, which is so consistent with what we define as quality education, suggests that we must go in one direction and one direction only, forward. The only other direction is back, and we don't want to go there. We have never questioned that assumption. We have never questioned where we're going. We have never questioned whether we should go there. The only thing we debated is what the best way is to take us there. Those are the battles over our schools and over reforms and over the core curriculum and core standards and all the rest of the stuff that we've been talking about. And I think most people who follow this program know where I stand on many of those things. But it seems to me that's what it's about. That's what the Yale faculty was talking about in 1828, is developing independent thinkers who can deal with change, who can deal with unexpected challenges in a positive, constructive way. The alternative, we believed, was really never an alternative at all. Because it's not progress, it's anti-progress. It's not civilization, it's lack of civilization. It's not modern, it's prehistoric. How can you defend it? Well, what we're finding now is that many people do defend it. They're defending it by voting to leave the European Union. They're defending it by promising to vote for Donald Trump. They're defending it by threatening to sink the TPP and other international free trade agreements. They're sinking it or rejecting it by claiming that we're going to withdraw from the world, that we're not going to adhere to the agreements of NATO, that if Russia attacks a member of NATO and it's not in our direct interest to intervene, then we won't. We don't care what the hell our commitment to NATO was during and after World War II. The world's changed. It's about us now. It's about my world and my God and my children and my future. And whatever's going to benefit them is what we need to do. And the only way to describe or to define what is going to benefit them the best is to ask me. Nobody ever asked me before, but they're asking me now. They are giving me the choice of voting for Donald Trump as opposed to vote for the establishment, for the people and the interests that created this damn mess. Well, I'm telling you, when you give me that opportunity, boy, I'm going to take advantage of it. But if you make me feel uncomfortable about it, I'll tell you I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but I know damn well I'm not. Because this is my chance to recover the world that I knew, that I felt important in. Remember the old adage, the old story that people used to say, would you rather be a small fish in a big pond? Or would you rather be a big fish in a small pond? Well, when the pond was small, I mattered. Now that you guys have made the pond big, I don't matter anymore. Nobody gives two damns about me, about my future, my self-respect, my ability to earn a living, my ability to raise children to be better off than me, my ability to take care of my kids and support a family, nobody cares about it but me. But when the pond was small, when I was a fish that mattered, I felt like I had some control over what happened to me. I want to go back there. And Donald Trump is my ticket to do that. And the more you attack him, the more you call him a narcissist and an egoist and a fanatic and a person who sees the world as reality television, as a person who cheats on his taxes, a person who uses debt to his own advantage, a person that abuses women, insults foreigners, belittles other religions. The more you do that, the more you're proving to me that I'm doing exactly what I ought to do. Man, I couldn't find more proof if I paid for it than listening to you attack everything I agree with. Because everything that I want and everything I value and everything I agree with that you attack convinces me that I'm right where I want to be and I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. November 8th can't come too fast for me. I can't wait. And Hillary can make all the money she wants in the Hamptons at fundraisers over the weekends. There aren't enough of you to stop me. There aren't enough. The people in England did it, and we're going to do it too. And you can't stop us. The question that I have as we near the end of our program today, we've got about 2 minutes left actually, is where do we go from here? I promise you that tomorrow in our program, our 2-hour program, we're going to revisit this issue. I don't know that I'll maintain the passion I did because it's obvious that I really feel strongly about this. And I don't know if I can recover that. But I'd like to go back and pick through some of this stuff in a little bit more detail so it makes a little bit more sense, because I think I probably slid over some things today that could be causing you a little bit of angst, and I understand that. But I felt like I was operating with a limited time span today of 90 minutes. But tomorrow I'd like to investigate this in more depth. I'd like to provide a few examples that seem to illustrate that this might be the kind of perception that may best explain some of the things that help us understand the world we're living in. But right now, it's time that we sign off. We're at 58 minutes after the hour. We've got less than 2 minutes to go before we hit the top of the hour and before the next program begins here on the on the Head On Radio Network. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for being with us. And I do hope that you will continue to do whatever you can do to support the Head On Radio Network and work with Bob Kincaid and Agnes and the other folks at Head On to keep programs like this on the air. I think they're needed, I think they're important, and I think they're valuable. And I personally feel extremely honored to be a small part of it. I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to invite you to come back tomorrow. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Be good to each other. And thank you so very, very much.